will now invite our moderator for session A, Shira. Dr. Shira de Bourbon-Parme is an urbanist and social anthropologist who integrates social science with strategic design to drive impact-driven development. She is currently the Well-being and Innovation Lead for Regenerative Cities at Rambo. Shira holds a Doctor in Philosophy in Social and Cultural Anthropology from the University of Oxford and a MSc in Urban Development Planning from UCL. Welcome, Shira.
Hi, everyone. Wow, it's quite overwhelming to be here. It's really exciting to be following a panel discussion after these amazing talks, so I would love to invite our speakers back to the stage. And with them, two more panelists for our discussion, Farshid Moussavi and Raffaele Ardito. Now, for introductions, Farshid Moussavi is an internationally acclaimed architect. She's an author. She is the founder of Farshid Moussavi Architecture, and she is the professor in practice of architecture at the Harvard GSD. You have served, I'm talking right while you're sitting next to me, so I'm talking. You received an order of the British Empire. You're an officer of the British Empire in 2018 for your service in architecture. She is currently trustee of the Norman Foster Foundation in London and New Architecture Writers, as well as one of the London Mayor's 42 design advocates. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And Raffaele, it's lovely to have you here. You are, again, currently an associate professor in structural mechanics with the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering in the Politecnico di Milano. And research interests include structural retrofit of large abandoned buildings and the theoretical, computational, and experimental mechanics of metamaterials and smart materials, which I'm very curious about. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. I'm really curious because you all have either in entirety or all of your practices take place in universities. And I think if we try to reconcile the two talks we had today about the entanglement and how we do that, and the dialogues and what that means for the classroom, I wonder how can we reconcile these things? Can we bring entanglement and dialogue into the studio setting or into the university setting in your classes? How do you see bringing these future uncertainties and the unpredictability that we see, that we've been talking about, the crisis that we're experiencing now, into the teaching that you do to actually solve problems creatively and bring back that creativity and innovation? So I know this is a big question, so I'm kind of opening it up. I'm wondering if anybody wants to take the first stab at it. Is there a way to reconcile these? How do we do it?
I'm happy to start. Well, thank you for the amazing presentations. They were very thought-provoking. I have my position at Harvard is called Professor in Practice. So my job is to bring in practice and academia together. So I've never felt that there is anything but having to deal with the entanglement. There are, of course, many of my colleagues who are full academics, and they focus on academic research. But I think if for those of us who bridge academia and practice, I think that is the very premise, and I guess we wouldn't be there doing it if we didn't think it wasn't possible. Obviously, I was listening to the earlier presentations, which obviously map the scale of challenge that face us, whether it's in academia or in the real world. But as designers, we have to break them down into, if we keep on thinking of that scale, we might just as well collapse. So we need to keep hope and break down the problems at the day-to-day scale of practice and believe that our mission is to address them. And I think everybody here is probably on that page. That's why we're here discussing the issues. So I think it's possible. I mean, you know, as for an architect, it's about dealing with it through housing, dealing with it through, you know, designing museums or designing places of work, both as places where we think how to optimize how we occupy these buildings, but also how we optimize how we build the fabric of these structures. So there is a lot to do, and I don't think any of us are going to be bored.
Would any of you like to respond to that or continue on from that?
Perhaps I can add some comments. I am in a different position because I am a full academic professor. And I like very much your talks, they're really inspiring. I'd like to add some comments. I agree with the fact that we have to revolutionize our system. I still keep using the word teaching, but I think that as I always understood this term, is like sharing knowledge, not imparting knowledge. And so I think that this should be something which inspire our job as academic professor. I agree with you, Jose. It's not imparting knowledge. We are on this side of the desk. The students are on the other side. And we just say, do this, that, and so on. We have to share our knowledge. I'm lucky because I'm working on different fields. I teach both to civil structural engineers and to architects. And I learn a lot when I go to the studio of architects because it's a blended classroom in which there is a direct contact with students. We are exchanging ideas. They are proposing something. I'm suggesting something else. It's a continuous interaction that is really nice. And so I think that could be also nice to make blended classes within students in architecture, students in engineering, so that both of them could become more open-minded. I think it's important to take the suggestions from your talks in order to improve the communication, to improve the sense of belonging of the students, exchange ideas. For this, we need also thinking about new spaces in our universities to allow for this kind of exchange of ideas. So this is a matter for you, for architects, to think about also new spaces to support this revolution in the education system.
I'd like to build on this, if I may. I completely agree with you, but I would say this is the job of university chancellors, etc., rather than architects, because I did some thinking about the future university not so long ago. And I think the university needs to become far more entangled. And the problem that we have now is we have brilliant minds, I think brilliant students who are really eager to make a difference, to the future. But the university divides knowledge into silos, which of course, when you're trying to, let's use your phrase, impart knowledge as well as break new kind of grounds, you also need to break it down into different kinds of information to be able to do that. But I myself went to 3 different universities. In none of them did I find a space that made me encounter students or faculty from other kinds of departments. Now, more recently, universities are trying to, in a very forced way, create labs so that people would do interdisciplinary research. But those are for the people who already are interested in the crossover or the entanglement. Our university doesn't breed that kind of mentality. It doesn't. If only we would not have buildings that would belong to architecture and buildings that would belong to engineering and buildings, and you would just book, the faculties would float across the university. Once you're going to a class for your class versus your class, you would meet other students. So I think the space of the university can be more radical in encouraging cross-fertilization of knowledge and breaking into the silos in a more natural way, so that we encourage learners and teachers, etc., to perhaps think of new forms of knowledge that don't exist now. The forms of knowledge that exist at the intersection between them. I think that the physical structures of the university are incredibly outdated. They have nothing to do with what we are speaking today.
Maybe I can comment, but please go ahead. No. Yeah, no. I mean, I think that the points that you're making are absolutely correct. But I think that if we look at the through the centuries, what is the one positive and continuous thing that universities have is that universities are about people, and universities are about mentoring, and they're about exchanging of ideas between people. And I think we enter. I mean, the fact that we're in Pearl, is sort of a little bit makes a point. Is whether the buildings and the sort of administrative structures that we have are going to affect the way in which these people interact is one question, but the other one is whether the people are going to use those administrative structures or these buildings in a way in which they foster that interaction themselves. I think if we actually recognize that universities are about people, and we recognize that universities are about the exchanges between people, then I think we will have a much more natural evolution, of the way in which we structure things to enable these interactions to happen. And the reality is that I don't really think we need to resolve this entanglement. The entanglement is the richness of the dialogue. And I think you might call it conflict, you might call it dialogue, you might call it whatever you want, but at the end, that's where the richness is. And I do recognize that these estates have been built through buildings through centuries, and therefore they're going to have all sorts of limitations. But I do believe that if we really encourage people to actually thrive around this concept of this collective exchange of ideas, then we can actually live with not so perfect buildings.
Interesting. Jose, I love the education-driven research. And I need to talk to you about something called the University of the Forest, which challenges the idea that it's just about people. It doesn't have to be just about people. We are in conversation with the walls, and that is changing how we communicate and sense operate. Anyway, I want to give an answer as a senior administrator. I'm a dean. And that is also framed in the context of what's today called as North America. So you have to translate for Europe. I'm not sure if it's going to land here. But one metaphor we are using there is, it goes like this. Remember the ivory tower, that archetype. And that archetype was pretty problematic. Especially in the Americas, we're thinking about colonialism and slavery as what sustains that archetype. And let's not talk about racism and sexism as well as part of that structure. But that archetype is no longer possible. And there are questions about it, if it ever was. What we have at the moment as the university is, at best, a leaning tower of Pisa on a swamp, right? And it's going to fall. So if we're bringing in the planetary boundaries breached, and if we bring collapse to bear as a layer on what we're doing, like this idea that in 5 or 10 years, what's viable and comfortable and familiar is not going to be possible, the university is also going to change significantly. And it can fall hard, and then we lose a lot. If it falls hard, we lose a lot. But if it falls softly, it can become, in the process, a tree. And as a tree that goes down, it can become a nursing log for the mycelium and the moss that then create the entanglement with society and with all the other entities of society. Then it becomes useful. And then all the resources that have been sequestered here become part of the ecology. And then they are redistributed in the ecology through the mycelium network. So I'm not sure if the universities in Europe are already contemplating what happens when that leaning tower falls into the swamp or not. But as you contemplate that in what we call North America, what becomes clear is that the students who are coming really sometimes want to burn it down because they are angry at the obsolescence and the difficulty of dealing with the obsolescence of the university. Whereas some people still want it to become the ivory tower, right? So you have that conflict. And for me as an administrator, what I'm trying to do is to convince people around me that the soft falling is our best bet, right? Figuring out how to bring this university down to reality. Because the idea of the ivory tower was of a tower dissociated from reality, where the best and the brightest, who were actually only part of one demographic, there was a lot of exclusion of other bests and brightest, but the best and the brightest would tell everybody what is and what should be through universal descriptions and prescriptions of reality. That kind of ontology is not sustainable anymore, and it's not going to be accepted by the current generations. So figuring out what to do in this soft falling in the sense of promoting the connection with reality, both the difficult realities of the planet, but also the realities of society, is the best bet for the university. That's what I'm trying to do as an administrator. And there are stacked changes that we have to be thinking about that are very difficult to communicate to academics too, right? So bringing it out of the usual research-driven education into education-driven education into the soft padding of the fall of the university is a huge challenge.
It's really interesting. Thank you. I think maybe this is a good point to see if anybody would like to ask any questions from the audience. Yes, I see someone there. Do we have mics? How does you? Perfect.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Sorry, yeah, thank you very much for the presentations and the comments. Education and learning doesn't stop at university, right? So my question is a two-part question. First, what do you see as your role and responsibility to influence the learning process of the engineers and architects after they graduate from university? And what do you see as our responsibility and our capacity to lead the education of our engineers and architects, taking into consideration, when they're in the industry, taking into consideration that we don't have perhaps the benefit of the university space and the experience and knowledge about the education process itself?
I teach, design studios and seminars. I think the seminars are different, but with the design studios, what I try to do is to help my students develop a discipline of thinking and practicing while they are at